Okay, I'm audible, I imagine. Perfect.
Yeah, you're audible.
AI is indeed a black box. What we're trying to do in government is allow open source technology that trains said AI to allow more companies, more developing world countries to have access to AI and maximize its utility. How do we think this is likely to play out? I think two things. One, by open source, we mean like the code becomes either accessible to GitHub or to the company's page. And like whenever a company uses it, it needs to cite specific open source code and also make it open source. Right. I think this is the common accepted matter that open source code happens anyways in the status quo. I studied computer science, so I have some spec, I guess. But secondly, I think that illegal usages of AI remain illegal. So if a company uses said AI, I don't know, to create AI child porn, probably it's going to get banned anyways and be criminalized. So we think the argument from opposition that is bad usage of said AI is already illegal, most likely it's going to be cracked down. What do we bring from prop? Two cases. One, why you create better usage of AI, maximizing its utility, and secondly, why you increase access to AI, specifically in developing world. First case, we create more usage of this AI because we allow the usage of add-ons and specific technology. So why does this specifically allow the usage of add-ons? I think, or make it at least easier. Three reasons. One, notice that in the status quo, most likely these other small companies do not have access to the open source code. This means they do not have access how this AI is specifically trained, the outcome of said AI, but also specific UI things that the code does in order for it to do to outsource said outcome of the code. This means that you have a barrier of entry and info in order for you to create add-on technology to said code. By add-on technology, we mean basically it is technology like applications that can use that code to produce other outcomes of its intended one. But secondly, I think there is a monetary incentive to produce said add-ons because you increase the user base of your site or you increase the user base of your company, which that trickles down to other specific products you might have, but also by creating said add-on, you might increase the efficiency of your own company because it's something, a specific tool that you want to develop in order to make your company more productive or your user base more productive. This means that one, we provide capacity to create said add-on by giving you the information on how to do it, but secondly, we prove you an incentive to do so, even if you don't get direct monetary benefit from selling the code because it's open source. Why then mega corporations can't have the spec or the direct incentive to create very specific code for the masses? I think three reasons. One, these companies focus more on a generalized audience in order to increase their user base as much as possible, both to get as many data points, but also to spread as much as possible to get as much marketplace. This means that the code needs to be somewhat basic. It needs to be somewhat non-specific because then it limits the usages of other instances. This means that's why if you type something, it will give you a good answer, but not the specifically best one. But secondly, I think that these companies miss many times the nuances of specific fields and the use AI might have. Like very specific example, in the music industry, you might want specific reverberation AI that simulates perfectly the size of the room and the objects inside it. This is very hard for an AI company to have specific spec on what that music company might want or how it might use it. Why small companies cannot develop big AI programs easily and therefore develop this by themselves without doing add-ons? I think three reasons. One, they have data. It freezes on my end, so I don't know if I'm freezing generally.
Froze for like 10 seconds.
Okay. These companies have access to data sets, but they do not have access to the bots.
Okay, sorry, you're freezing up too much.
That create the bots is
sorry,
high.
can you stop? Can you stop? I have you at 4, and you're just constantly freezing in and out. So I haven't missed anything yet, but it seems pretty likely that I will.
On my end, it's completely frozen like that. I'll try to join from Medita. So, yeah. Apologies for the delay. I just joined from a device through data, not Wi-Fi, so it doesn't lag. Okay.
Much better.
Okay, I was 349. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So small companies have access to potential data sets in order for them to create the AI, but they do not have access to the specific nuances of how to train said bots because it requires many amounts of basic data and basic training to be done, that it needs computing power, firstly, but also it requires a long amount of time to be developed. This means that small companies are unable to produce large language models like ChatGPT, but they're able to do specific usage of them and specifically point them with databases that they are training the already built ChatGPT model. This means that although small AI companies cannot produce those models, they can produce small ones. Why add-ons create generally higher amount of usage, and therefore it massively increases the amount of utility you can get out of this? I think two reasons. One, in the long term, you have, and specificity means that you can create specific usages of this. This means that it fixes issues that potentially big companies do not know, but also it makes it more usable and therefore more prone to be used in the first place, increases utility. But secondly, I think it works in the long term as needs change. AI is more able to adapt and therefore better. Why this increases the accessibility of AI in developing countries? Because of language barriers and data. Before that, I will take CEO.
Well, small companies have the access to AI. Some bad actors, like potentially Russia or China, let's say, will also benefit from it.
Yeah, I've tackled this in my framing in the start, but if they want to have access like China and Russia, the big fucking governments, they probably can develop this AI technology most likely anyway. Okay, you increase accessibility of developing countries because of language code barriers. Why is AI generally inaccessible to the world? I think two reasons. One, because it is trained by English programmers that use English databases to create it. This means that many nuances in language are totally lost when you try to translate ChatGPT, etc., to foreign countries. But secondly, note that the data sets that AI companies use are also mostly Western-centric based. This means that the outcome of that is also that. So even if AI is not locked behind a paywall, it is not usable that much in other countries like Greece, because you cannot use it to extrapolate, say, data from it. Why open source makes it more accessible? Because one, now you can train the specific AI that works on different languages and different data sets that could not be done in the past because you do not have direct access to that code. But secondly, you can make it directly to your fauna, to your specific environment, which makes things like AI for environmental technology also more accessible to the world. For all of the above reasons, I think I'm at 7:15, but I'm not sure. Vote OG.
Thank you for that speech. Second speaker of the go.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Great. Give me 15 seconds. I need to put some water. Okay. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think the moment that you have an open source, the moment you have the capacity to improve the quality of life of different individuals and different people that have this kind of a necessity, it is really mandatory that you do this for the sake of humanity, for the sake of living beings. Proud to propose this motion. I think opening opposition has 3 attacks against us. The first is, less money, less likelihood of innovation. I'm going to tackle this in several ways. Second thing they say, it's too much development, so this means that you cannot regulate it. Let's see like the counterpart they have. They say we can fiat that they're going to regulate inside opposition. I assume that they can fiat that government has an incentive to regulate, but that does not mean they have the fiat to say that they have the capacity to regulate. If they attack us on our model when it comes to how much governments can have spec knowledge when it comes to how much they regulate, they cannot just assume that inside opposition, politicians have big brain epistemic access on coding programmers and they have the capacity to understand regulation. I think operating opposition has to and is contingent on proving capacity to regulate. I think we're going to do it better and explain the exclusivity on open source and explaining why regulation is more likely to happen outside the house. The third thing they say is oh my God, developing countries will still access it because accessibility is not a major part of this debate. Let's start from the bottom. I think Panagiotis already explains in a very spec-heavy knowledge why adaptability of this specific algorithm is really necessary. Being able to actually fuck around with ChatGPT is not the same as to have forecasting on weathers. It's not the same as actually having the capacity to prolong and have specific healthcare treatments and better diagnosis. It's not the same when it comes to actually have precision on farming. All of these kind of nuanced technology advancement and the adaptability of the data and the language and the usage it requires, it costs a lot of millions of dollars based on the characterization of opening opposition and law analysis. Because if you say you want to maximize profit and the only way to monetize the algorithm is to actually fucking create this kind of an oligopoly and make this a gazillion out of profit, right? So this means that the moment that you have this kind of open source rest of the house, the democratization of this kind of usages is immensely better rest of the house. Secondly, they say, market shares is organically necessary because the companies want to include developing countries. And I mean, that's factually wrong. I don't see how Google or Amazon is treating developing countries in a better sense when they want to have market shares. Secondly, the response to the POI to Boaz is actually self-suiting the case. Because if you say that, these companies have an incentive to be inclusive, then why on the first page you say market share is so big so they don't care? Third observation. The motion says major tech companies sharing. That means that multinational companies that have the market share are obliged to share. I'm not entirely certain if startup companies have this kind of obligation. It is uncertain inside opening opposition to what extent these startup companies will be fucked over. Let's now see in responses on why innovation will still stand. 3 reasons. I think you still want to be on the edge of selling first. Google is competing with Microsoft. The head for talents and for better programmers and stuff like that is on the edge, right? You have brand loyalty, which means that you are the one that the customers will trust to serve you this kind of services. You are the company that companies will come to you to be able to buy this kind of products and to buy having the accountability and the security and the transparency that the algorithm works, that you're going to be there to fix it when something malfunctions, that you're going to be there to explain how to use it. So an incentive to monetize and to actually sell out still exists, right? When it comes to advancement that the market cannot keep up with you because you're on the edge of having more experts, you're on the edge of having more capacity to, explain, break down the black box. So the moment that you're on the edge of innovation, you still have the capacity to monetize based on that. Secondly, Panagiotis already says that opening up is not responding. You do it for your own usage. Amazon creates better algorithm to have precision on how to, sell out more stuff with the most efficient way. So you have a self-interest to do this. Experts want to fuck over other experts and have better algorithms. 3, academia also has this, and it's included in this debate. I think different forecasts and different GitHubs have an incentive to have think tanks, to have the capacity to sell out to companies in order to have this kind of a competitive advantage. Fourthly, you can co-op collaboration from different edges. So the moment that you see the really smart Indian kid that has the competing capacity to create a better algorithm is the moment that Facebook can actually co-op this kind of algorithm and actually fast track the advancement and the curation of this algorithm. On the best case scenario of opening opposition, let's see why this kind of innovation is more important than any kind of misuse or slowing down the innovation. I think it is inevitable at some point that you're going to lead this innovation because humanity and companies need this kind of advancement. You need to maximize the quality of life. Companies have an incentive and inherent capacity to do this in a better way. So the best harm opening opposition has so far is slowing down the progress, not completely eliminating the progress and innovation. Let's now weigh off with misuse because I guess CO is running that. 3 responses. It is mandatory to do modification publicly per the info slide. This means you have a clear list now of who is modifying the code for deepfakes. You have a clear narrowing down prospect and inspection on who is using the AI algorithm in a specific way. Secondly, you can use the most developed AI to defend and prohibit from spreading malicious content. Because the moment that the AI is progressing, and the moment that the code is better, it is more able to actually capturize and actually have the capacity to point out the necessary malicious content. Which videos are deepfakes and which videos are not deepfakes? Which images from DALL-E are actually fabricated and which images are actually real? Because you have the algorithm that actually breaks down the black box itself, and you can actually have the censorship being increasingly better. Thirdly, I think in our side of the house, the moment that this is an active threat, the moment that you have the soft capital to do this as an open source code, you have more of an incentive to include the government. We're not just fiating the regulation, we're proving the regulation by saying now you're actively involving the government to regulate and to be very, very careful on what it is allowing as an application to be used, right? So you involve the government because there is a more immediate threat in us at the house. Therefore, the government has more capacity to cooperate with kind of multinational companies, to cooperate to be able to track down and have better transparency and accountability. All in all, why democratization of technology has immense benefits that are weighed over. I think the precision farming, the healthcare advancement, the weather forecasting, the better bureaucracy that's fucking immensely in developing countries when it comes to solving massive problems of bureaucrat stuff, the resource optimization, all of these have three major benefits. A, the intensity of benefits that is trickling down to the citizens are fucking immense on quality of life, on food stamps, on surviving the economy and having less relapses. Secondly, the permanent effects on how this snowballs. If you cannot reverse this, the governments have already this and they can use it. We're very proud to stand for the little guy. Very proud to be opening government.
Thank you for that speech. We now welcome the second speaker of the opposition.
Okay. Sorry, would it be possible to get people to turn their camera off? It's like super rainy here and I've been cutting out, so it helped. Yeah, thank you so much. I'll take PYs in chat. There are two things I want to note at the top of my speech that minimize the impact that opening government is able to reach when it comes to access and development. First, this debate is about generative AI, and other forms of AI can independently develop in the marketplace on either side of the house. Example, in medical usage isn't actually conducted by the vast majority of generative AI developers like ChatGPT and OpenAI and so on, because those things are independent or very slightly adjacent to the type of development we're talking about in this debate. Second, that development, as nebulous as it is really, really hard to gauge when it comes to AI. Recently, ChatGPT released ChatGPT 4.0, which is significantly more powerful than ChatGPT 4. But in any basic functionality, i.e. in usage and integrative capacity, in usage on a day-to-day basis, people aren't able to actualize its efficiency as something that is genuinely beneficial or genuinely meaningful. So it's entirely unclear what new development actually offers on their side of the house. So what I'm going to split this debate up is on three levels. Firstly, I'm going to engage with development and still try to point out why development is worse off or much slower in the long run on their side. Second, I'll talk about accessibility and highlight why it's mitigated significantly. And finally, point out why the minimal engagement we get from on their side of the house on our claims on malicious usage outweighs everything. Firstly, on development, opening government's claim on development is that it is better to develop insofar as you're able to get more specific usage because of data sets and more specific usage because of codes and accessibility and so forth. The first thing that we want to point out is the development of AI is still a massive undertaking to take on, even if open source code exists. The reason for this is quite simple, right? It requires significant computing power. What that means is the companies that are able to meaningfully test AI and use generative AI in ways that actually develops new data sets and so on aren't ever going to be like random startups that have access to the code. And if anything, those startups can still exist on our side of the house when there's closed source code, because ChatGPT, for example, makes it accessible through things like API development and open API that allows people to develop their own AI models and integrate them on their side of the house. This debate was specifically about source code, though, and the harm of source code that we point out is very nuanced. It is A, arbitrary efficiencies in terms of like the model's like predictive capacity, and B, the safeguards that are imposed on the model that I'll talk about a little bit later. So if we're only looking at the predictive capacity of models, realistically, the competition is going to remain very similar to what we're seeing right now, which is it remains relatively oligopolistic and relatively similar competitors are able to compete. The unique difference, though, is on their side of the house, the mandating of open source code makes it so that if any entity wants to, develop its own AI, it is no longer required to think up unique code or employ unique experts on their side in order to develop this. What that looks like right now on our side is Google and Microsoft and OpenAI all developing different generative AI models that achieve very different things and are able to give each other constant competition that forces them to explore new avenues. On their side, as Apple did, except it would no longer have to pay, it can just use OpenAI's source code and implement it with its trillions of dollars without ever giving or compensating OpenAI. This has massive impacts on two levels. Firstly, it means that the experts that they say they're going to, engage with on their side of the house don't actually go to those companies in the long run because they know they're either better off going to the same monopolistic companies that can develop the best on their side of the house, or they know that they're going to get fucked over and never be paid, for example, as many developers on OpenAI already are, insofar as they're facing a monetization problem before their partnership with iOS. So that's the type of harm that happens on their side, right? It's not a harm of, like accessibility being worse or so forth, but it's that you have no incentive to actively develop and spend billions of dollars on massive chip farms and like NVIDIA chips and so on, if it's just easier for a company to just, then piggyback off of you. Their response here is to say, well, no, because there's like at the edge of innovation, there's still competition, and Facebook is open source, but it still works. But that's not how this works, right? Because AI is integrated into other products, it is often very rarely offered as a product itself, which means that the brand loyalty that you accrue is independent of the usage of AI that you have. So it's unclear what that brings. So it's not like Facebook. And B, it's not like you have to remain on the edge of innovation. If you can just piggyback off of someone else's innovation, that's billions of dollars saved, which might be much more than the profits you would otherwise make by consistently innovating. So development is a clash for our side. Secondly, on accessibility, they say that the development leads to more accessibility because companies right now don't want to make AI accessible. Dazzle gives you analysis as to why companies want to make AI accessible right now, right? Firstly, AI is super precarious in the way that it's used. Its integration needs to be carefully studied, and people don't really want to use it because it's leading to things like job displacement on their side of the house. That means that companies want to make sure that they're selling AI at the best ability and the best capacity. And that means that on their side of the house, making AI accessible is a huge mandate for companies. But B, it's unclear why the ways in which accessibility occurs on their side is a good thing. I think the realistic impact of accessibility on their side is that companies, for example, in India that currently are able to hire programmers no longer have to rely significantly on those programmers when they have access to the perfect model of ChatGPT that is able to supplement a lot of the programming that occurs on their side of the house. So it's unclear why, if it is the case that AI specifically is brought on by other tech companies in the developing world, why that development necessarily occurs in ways that is a massive boost to accessibility. Even if we concede that there does exist some accessibility, the trade-off here then just ends up becoming on the capabilities of your translation software, which we presume insofar as the global market will end up mattering at some point, these AI companies will have to develop at some point anyways. Our claim then on malicious AI was the most important. Firstly, as we point out, it's much easier to regulate closed source oligopolistic code on our side than it is to regulate open source code that anyone has access to, because you can remove the hard-coded safeguards that exist when you use, for example, DALL-E, such that DALL-E never allows you to create likenings of actual human beings or people that exist in the real world. What that means is that even if regulation follows and we make it so that these things are illegal, there's a massive cost to making sure that every single fucker on the internet that now has access to this type of open source code and can implement it in ways that allows them to generate things like, for example, malicious images and so on, is able to do so much more easily, even if the fiat power remains the same as per DPM's concession. The impact here is significant, right? Because even if it's just one usage of malicious AI, that AI can genuinely ruin someone's life. And on their side, all that accessibility and development does is maybe lead to better weather forecasts, but it also leads to significant job displacement. But on our side, the harm is so much worse. It leaves people's lives much more destitute. And that's why you weigh it over the claims that they make. Incredibly proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. We now welcome the third speaker of the government. And I'm not going to turn my video on unlisted.
Am I audible?
Can you just say one more sentence? That was pretty soft.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Moment. Two points that are crucial to understand what is symmetric and what actually changes in this debate. Both were brought and not analyzed by the top half. Firstly, as said already by our POI, there is already an open source model out in the wild, updated by Facebook. We think they have an incentive to actually continue publishing it to show that they are continuing helping AI. They're already doing it, and people already contribute to their code from outside Facebook. This is crucial because it means that the analysis coming forward about the abuse or anything like that coming from OO is just from OO is irrelevant. The ability to use this model already exists. There, notice your notes, there is no explanation as to why you need several models, and it was not enough to take one model. This also explains a huge hole in opening government, not explain to us why in order to develop long-term AI, you need several models which will answer that, which we will answer. Secondly, as said by opening opposition, you can already rent models. We will explain to you specifically why it isn't enough for a small company to pay Amazon to use Amazon Lambda, for example, to use their model without knowing their code, and why you need specifically to have the code in order to advance. One point of rebuttal before I will move on. They tell us a lot about, look, now companies will not have an incentive to actually invest and create better AI models. Notice, there are a lot of companies that don't want to run their own huge model. If you want, for example, a chatbot, you need a huge model for that because it needs to chat. Chatting is something that is very hard for AI, so you need a lot of servers. So still, you want to work with the company that has the best model to do that. Why is that crucial? Because people who know the model and know the code know how to run it most efficiently, specifically with the hardware that this company has, i.e. the data centers employed by Google are different than the data centers employed by Amazon in terms of where they reside, in terms of which processes they use, and specifically which arithmetic functions are easy to use and which arithmetic functions take too much time to use and therefore are less efficient. So anyway, you have the huge incentive to create your own model. Let's move on to our argument. Firstly, why you need specifically, many companies have been open source in order to have development. This in of itself brings us above OG. Firstly, the ability to compare models means that you can actually make a better model out of all of them. What do we mean by that? Firstly, many models try to achieve the same in different types of code. The ability to benchmark specific types of code or very specific types of operation happens only on our side of the house. And therefore, you can understand what is the best efficient way to have a specific thing. Secondly, the ability to question and see specific answers from specific processes and see how they operate means you understand better how to do that. But thirdly, there are just other ways. The ability to combine code from different ways means it's just better. Just as a basic intuition pump, yeah? If you see one bridge, you can build the same bridge. But seeing many bridges and understand how they work and what specifically makes them that means you can have the best bridge for any specific landscape that you need. This means that the ability to have a specific models is much better on our side of the house. And here comes the second way where we answer, we're better than OG. Because why is ChatGPT or connecting to Amazon Lambda not enough? Firstly, specifically because you have different models, you are actually available to take the best of all worlds. If you're, for example, a company that detects in eyes, specifically eye infections and things like that, you need very specific parts of the model. You don't need ChatGPT, and many times you don't know what to do with chat, for example. You need specific functions. The ability to take from different models and have that together is better. Notice, just asking different models is not enough, because asking 5 people with 100 IQ is never like asking one person with 140 IQ, which is the relevant analogy here. Secondly, in terms of input, today you need to give specific inputs that companies can actually get. In many times you cannot get to input, which, for example, isn't even an image, but specific ages and specific pigments in the body that many models you need to translate for them. Why is it crucial? Firstly, it's time of development, but secondly, even more crucially, it means that you lose much of the data. Thirdly, in terms of cost, many times because these are huge models that are universal, when you pay Amazon, you need to pay huge amount of money. But specifically when you need a very specific task, for example, as the eyes, for example, understanding if specific crops need fertilizers or not, you need very specific amounts of code. The ability to make your a process 100 times faster means you get it 100 times also cheaper, which is the difference between a startup collapsing or a startup succeeding. Before I move on, I will get
While malicious actors can still use the final AI product on our side, it's harder because there are built-in protections, such as those that prevent racist or sexist output. The comparative on your side is complete flexibility to change the source code.
Thank you.
Including
As I already said in the POI, there is already an open source model out there. You can copy it, you can use it. We've explained to you specifically what changes because of multiple modes. Okay, let's talk about better safety. Look. Firstly, we think there is no incentive today to care enough of safety in closed source. Why? Firstly, it costs a lot of money for having people not specializing in AI, but moreover specializing in AI and safety and understanding. This is a new field, not a lot of people, cost a lot of money. Secondly, clearing problems in safety means you slow down any development and require more checks for any deployment, which is hard for your competition. Notice, you can't see the problems today. Firstly, because the models deployed to very rich clients, etc., are different from the models that you can see online. So people answering ChatGPT is different. Secondly, it's very easy to do very basic barriers that don't really change the thing. I.e., for example, preventing when you say Afro-American or Black from writing certain things. These are not checks that prevent the model from bringing the answers, but specifically the output that the user sees. It doesn't work when you have more sophisticated things that you give to answers. For example, when you actually need to look into eye colors of specific people and there is correlation with Black. Why will it change on our side? The ability to see inside the model that there are no safety checks, the ability to see and the ability to post into Reddit and things like that, that this is problematic, that the algorithm doesn't check where the information comes from, that the algorithm doesn't check that it gives accurate information, important things, means there is huge pressure. Specifically, we see today in Congress, in many places, where CEOs are asked, when they are shown that they are lying and they are shown only on our side, this is exactly where there is enough pressure to make them change themselves. I call you to propose.
Thank you for that speech. We now welcome the third speaker of the opposition.
Okay, great. Am I audible? All right, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, this debate has basically boiled down to econ spec, right? The idea is that on one side of the house, we have people saying competition is good, and on the other side, government, people are saying, well, actually, we should make it open source because then everyone can access it. We're going to have better safety, innovation on the bleeding edge, et cetera, et cetera. It's an econ debate, right? Unfortunately for side government, opposition has the distinct advantage of defending the view of how everything else works, right? There's a reason why the government is running around saying, hey, Microsoft, make Windows open source, right? There are obvious intuitive reasons for why competition is necessary. So then government is forced to do something unique. They're forced to say something unique in how AI develops makes our argument true, right? And I do think that opposition kind of missed how this is necessary, right? That for government to get their benefits, there must be something unique about AI development that makes those benefits plausible. I'm going to explain to you what that uniqueness is and why it doesn't work for government at all. First of all, I'd like to specifically note about OO. I think that OO's case, I do buy it. I think that probably Gov does some good mitigation here, that maybe they might be able to still see some progress on their side of the house, but they do mention something very specific that I do think kills their case here. We heard specifically from DPM that only some companies, the biggest companies, are going to need to be open source. Panel, when I heard this is ridiculous, right? Because now there is absolutely zero incentive. We're supposed to some incentive. There is zero incentive for big companies to do any investment, because now instead of smaller companies being able to alter their code and then the big companies still have access to it, now the big companies that did all of the upfront investment put their code online, and then smaller companies, by some arbitrary metric, can then take that code, change it, and then not make that open source. Panel, why would a big company ever invest any money into anything when another person can steal it, change it, make it better, and then not share it back? It doesn't make any sense. In my opinion, this wipes out the GovCade. Now let's specifically talk about what makes AI unique. What is so unique about AI development? The fact is, AI needs a huge amount of upfront investment compared to all other kinds of software because of the amount of data necessary to train the model, right? And this is what I think something that Gov missed, where they're like, oh, well, Facebook is open source. Zuckerberg made Facebook in his dorm room, right? You don't see anybody doing that with AI models because of the amount of upfront investment needed to make AI work, right? So what kind of people have access to this kind of huge data sets necessary to train the models to get, for example, the access to farming or healthcare that Gov is claiming? In my opinion, there's two, right? You've got governments and you've got big corporations, right? So when Gov comes up and says, oh, well, when you make it open source, then you're going to have, your mom and pop shop in the middle of Africa that's now going to be able to make their farming really good because they have access to the source code. No, because these people don't have access to the huge amounts of data necessary to train these models. What's really going to happen, panel, is that large companies are going to get access to that source code. Those companies are going to have access to huge amounts of data, and then they're going to go into the developing world with these applications, and where the regulation is worse, where they're better able to take advantage of people and say, hey, look, well, I trained this so that it'll work. Now pay me a bunch of money so that you can use it. I don't see there being any less exploitation, probably even more exploitation on Gov's side of the house because of the unique nature of AI development and the amount of data needed to make it effective, right? You're not going to have people just like sitting in their bedroom just being like, oh, I'd love it if I could train the AI model this way. Because first of all, they need to have the spec knowledge to know how the code works. And then second of all, they need to have the data necessary to actually train the code to do what they want it to do. In status quo, what happens is the big companies that have access to their code, then they're able to import these data sets and they can say, okay, we're going to train this to do XYZ, and then we'll lease this out to you, right? And this works. This is totally, I think, probably symmetrical benefit on both sides of the house, right? Like, I don't really think that most people that would be accessing these kinds of benefits in the developed world really care about having to pay $5 a month for ChatGPT or whatever, right? The point of contention is in the developing world where maybe that upfront cost means something, but as we just realized, it doesn't matter because anyone that could possibly use that open source code in a positive way to help the developing world for free doesn't have access to those data sets. Who has access to those data sets? Big companies and governments. Now let's get into the government bit, because this is where I think the case really starts to shift towards CO here. We heard some bits about AI safety from OO, about how you could use it to, ruin someone's life with like some AI porn or something. And this is absolutely true. It's absolutely tragic and does happen, right? But I'd like to specifically talk about, once again, who has access to these big data sets. And we're talking about huge governments, all right? Maybe North Korea, Iran, possibly Russia. They probably don't have the skilled programmers, the computing power to build their own AI models from scratch, right? I think this is pretty plausible, right? Instead, they're forced to result on a bunch of people in like some warehouse somewhere being internet trolls online. But now, under Gov's side, they have access to the data. They don't have access to the programmers. Well, now they have access to the code. They just import all the data, and now all of a sudden they have a built-in AI troll that now they can use to spew misinformation online. I'll take OG.
Most data sets are freely and publicly accessible. Notice, small companies do not require to build AI from the start. They don't require massive data. They require data only to the specific thing they want to do. That's cheap.
Yeah. I think this is only marginally true, in that as far as you might be able to get the data sets from publicly available information, the amount of work required to compile, store, process that data, that is something that individuals, small groups of people can't do. Notice that when did OpenAI start becoming really successful as a startup? It's when they partnered with Microsoft. Right? That's when they had access to the huge amounts of data. That's when we saw the huge leaps forward. Now, getting back to this government point, when you have these bad actors that might not have the ability to build AI models from scratch, but now do have access to the data and now have access to the open source models, then we get into a huge impact of just a massive amount of misinformation. We're already seeing the impacts of misinformation, deepfakes online, in the elections in the United States, elections in the EU, all of these things. Imagine how much worse that would be when you have just farms of AI, open source AI in the hands of bad actors that can just pump out misinformation at a rate we've never seen before. It would be catastrophic. And of course, the impacts on an individual person that has, revenge porn made of them online using AI is bad. But that pales in comparison to the absolutely catastrophic impact impact of the amount of misinformation that could be put online by bad actors with AI models. If you hand the open source code to some bleeding edge AI that was just developed by some huge institutional company in the United States or something to Iran, it's almost impossible to imagine what they might be able to do in terms of influencing what we think about our elected officials, what we think about world news, what we think about just about everything, even more than they already do today. And that's why I am proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. We now welcome the fourth speaker of the government.
Hear me. Cool. Assume you can.
Just say one more sentence. Just.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Just give me a second. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Look, I'm going to talk about two simple things. I'm going to explain why we actually flip both opposition by explaining why we get more safety under our side of the house and why this is the first time that actually those companies are going to be incentivized to actually care about AI safety. Noticing that just a year and a half ago, 100 developers actually noticed that we don't have enough AI safety, going against OpenAI and all of those things, saying, look, like humanity, we need to take care of AI safety more than we do right now. Therefore, we think it's a crucial thing, and we'll talk about it a bit more later. Then I'm going to explain about innovation. But I think that most of the case that we just heard from CO is kind of similar to OO, but I think that to one crucial point, they become kind of more extreme, right? They say, look, we have North Korea, Iran, Russia, that right now don't have the ability to create all of those things. I have to say, as a person that lives in the Middle East, that the problem with Iran is not that they don't have the ability, right? Once Iran decided that they want to have nuclear bomb, you know what they did? They had all the funds in order to create a nuclear bomb from zero. Therefore, I don't think that Iran necessarily needs to have the West in order to create that. But then also the thing that they say about now they're going to have all of the knowledge. Like technically, if you have an open source code, that does not mean that you have the same knowledge and the same information. That does not come with each other. And second of all, OpenAI uses knowledge that is on Google and public knowledge. This is why we have the newest models actually having more information, because they already take more information that we got in 2023 and 2024. Therefore, Iran can already get all of that information if they want to. Let's talk about better safety. OO says, look, now we're going to have an abuse of China and bad actors as well, and that today we're going to now we have the ability to create regulation. Tomorrow we won't be able to do that because it's going to be too fast. Opening government says, which something that we think is very true. Bad countries can already do that themselves right now, and now we will know that they are copying that specific code, and that we can't do the regulation right now. What are the problems with opening government though? That they never actually explain why we can't do that specific regulation today. They say, look, the fact that they have the incentive does not mean that they have the capacity, but they never actually explain what's going to change under our side of the house. We actually give the reasons why we flip the case from both oppositions. And second of all, notice that they never actually compare the fact that, yes, maybe China and Russia, it's going to be easier for them to create some of those things that we need to concede in this debate, because they will have more ability to do it easily. But what are the things that we prevent? This is what we actually need to notice. Let's talk about that specifically. So what does Boaz gives to you specifically in the safety issue? He explained why today, and this is crucial, governments don't really understand how those code works and how those code do. Notice, OO says things are moving on very fast. We think that that is something that already occurring today. We think that OpenAI actually competing with Claude of Anthropic already now it's very hard for government to actually understand what's going on inside. We think that tomorrow we don't need to trust only the government to do a good job into doing that. What is Boaz explaining? Boaz explains to you why tomorrow, once we're going to have an open source to do that, we're going to have many more coders and many more developers that even if they are not the best developers, and even if they don't have the funds to actually be a part of OpenAI today, they have all the ability to actually go through the code and search what's wrong with it. Where is the flip in this debate? Because notice that already today, we think that China and Russia has already incentives to use the codes that are already being publicized and to use and to steal the information as well. But today, those companies don't have the incentives to actually prevent from those actors to do malicious thing with that. Why is that? Boaz explains to you, because it costs a hell lot of money to actually put all of those guards on all of the code that you already have. If you want to develop that specific guard, you do that on the trade-off of actually developing more of the code itself. Therefore, today, companies don't have the incentives to prevent that. But tomorrow, once it's going to be easier for government, and there is going to be more public accusation of those companies not doing that. And thirdly, if you want to differentiate yourself from other companies that are going to have the open source, this is where you're actually going to give a fuck about making sure that safety is going to be good. Meaning flipping all of the things that both opposition are scared of, saying that only on our side of the house we have the incentive to do that. Why is it crucial? Because we think that now those companies are going to flag out when China and Russia are going to use that specific code in order to create nuclear bombs or atomic bombs or biological weapons. Now they're going to input in those codes specifically the things that are going to flag out when an abuse is occurring in a way that's going to be easier for us as West to know and to deal and to do that. Notice it's not only about China and Russia, but also about like revenge porn and things that has to do with the most basic human rights. Therefore, we think that this is the most important thing in this debate, because even if we're going to get a bit less innovation, the fact that we can actually help saving more lives, the fact that we can actually help the West in actually fighting against malicious actors, we think that this is the most crucial thing in this debate. And if only on our side of the house we have even 10% or 15% more chances of doing that, we think it's enough to win this debate. But let's also talk about innovation. But before I do that, let's engage with opening. Closing.
It seems unlikely that they want to code for the good of humanity. It seems like individual coders will just modify it for themselves, take the profit, and even for things such as malicious intent. So what is the incentive for that to happen?
Specific individual actors can already do that with the open source they have right now. We explain why now they're going to have an accountability that we don't have under the status quo. Innovation. Opening government already stated there are some problems, right? Some big companies don't want to do niche things, and they are not open to developing countries. We agree. But then opening opposition says, look, but they can use just the outcome at the end of it in order to get many of the advantages that OG tried to claim. This is specifically where Boaz come into the picture. Boaz explains why specifically companies cannot just use the output of ChatGPT in order to get all of their benefits. Boaz explains that, in many of them, you need to have a very specific part of what ChatGPT does, and you are not able to pay for the entire thing as a small company, and now the pricing will go down. He explains, second of all, why you can actually specify it for yourself, and in order to do that, you have to have the entire code in terms of how you analyze it and in terms of the input that you actually get out of it. We think that only once you explain why you can't just use the thing that we already have, this is a unique thing that you need to have an open source. We think that because we help humanity more and because we develop it faster, this is why you need to choose CG.
Thank you for that speech. We now call upon the fourth speaker of the opposition.
Sorry, just give me a moment to organize my note. Okay. So this debate is essentially centered on two main clash. One is economic and one is safety. So in my speech, I'll try to prove to you why the economic benefit provided by the government side is very marginal and why CO brings you the most concerning case regarding AI safety. First, I just want you to know that Dominic provides you the most realistic characterization regarding how AI works, about the uniqueness of AI. And then let's talk, I'll do a team by team analysis. Let's just first engage with CG. So what response do we hear? First, they say there will be individual coders, but as they already concede, they are not the best mind in the world, and they are just like sporadic individuals. So I'm wondering how this, by opening access to them, will meaningfully contribute to the safety issue. Secondly, they bring you the case that their company now have no incentive. I think that's just a fallacy, i.e., Google has a strong incentive for its code not being misused by North Korea to launch nuclear weapons. It will be, one, a huge danger to the humanity, and second, be huge, like, ruin of their reputation. So I think currently the government, the huge multi-corporations, for financial and for its reputational and for kind of danger reason, have sufficient incentive to safeguard their AI code. So I think those responses are invalid. And then what we hear from the CG is that you can have different models. You can have after seeing that you open up more potentials. However, as Dom tells you that all these things without sufficient amount of data, you cannot meaningfully make them beneficial. AI is a black box stuff, so that requires nearly absolutely accuracy. What do we mean? What do I mean by that? It's like if you have auto drive, you presumably want it to be absolutely safety because nobody understands what decision-making process it has gone through in the black box. That means even though you are just doing a small thing, small companies, like OG tells you, maybe you're just doing a little bit of navigating, maybe you're just doing a little bit of weather forecasting. Presumably for your model to work, you still requires a large amount of data to make your model absolutely or as accurate as possible. And those smaller companies are still lack the financial and technological capacity to fulfill that due to their limited resources. So I think that largely deal with CG and OG's economic benefits. Also, OG tells us that it can also help the developed world. I think similar things applies here, i.e., in most developing world, they still lack meaningful resources to collect vast amount of data. Well, since the code has been published, since there is, as Dom tells you, there's no incentive for the big companies to provide more for other companies to benefit for free. Now the companies are going to change their investment into monopolizing, into collecting all the data. And since they already have vast amount of financial resources and technological resources compared to the most developing countries or small companies, they are more likely to occupy all these shares. This means smaller companies and developing countries are unlikely to meaningfully develop their own system, since now the company has shifted their incentive from developing new AIs, new code, to kind of harvesting data to collect it before everyone else. So at the end of the day, it is still those who has the financial resources that benefit from this system, whereas the more economic benefit from the government side is marginal. Before I move on, I will take OG.
For CEO's case to achieve tipping point, they need to prove why AI technology A is not acceptable to China, or B needed for China to do nuclear weapons and stuff. They never proved this.
Okay.
All of the stuff is mitigation.
Okay, so I'll deal with safety right now. So this is how it's different from our opening, because our opening just identifies sporadic malicious intent by individuals or by some sort of like AI porn or deepfake whatsoever. But I want to concede that we're not only talking about like China or Russia, who has a reasonable level of AI development, but even so, I think there's still a level of asymmetrical development between Western states, i.e., Silicon Valley is still the most advanced technological places in the world. So there's still an incentive for China to copy and to further their development. We see no need for boosting that. But further, there's also actors who currently lack these kind of technologies, these capacities to do that, such as North Korea, such as various terrorist groups. Maybe, well, I'll be cautious here, but like Taliban or whatsoever. There is, even though we may consider in the best case scenario, they lack some certain knowledge, they may need some time to work out how to benefit from this kind of new technology that's open to them. But since the harm is so malicious, i.e., all this kind of terrorist groups or authoritarian states will likely to use them to boost their power and endanger the world peace, especially in a period where the world is experiencing multiple wars. I think the safety concern outweighs all the potential of economic gains, even in their best case scenarios. And also, I want to note that yes, those companies can build everything from zero, possibly, but there's no need for us to lower the bar significantly, even though we by OG's case that they are not made for specific purposes, but providing them those basic or fundamental ways of working out things. This significantly improves those malicious organizations' capacity to further improve. We do not want to shoulder that risk. And this is how we different from our opening, because we identify the most realistic risks, the actors that are most likely to utilize and abuse the code provided by Western states. Also, note, our opening also talk about the quality of AI development and also how do we outweigh our opening in terms of like individual malicious intent. I also want to note, because individuals or smaller organization presumably requires a high level of technologies that just filter out many like sporadic malicious attempt. Further, most deep fakes and most kind of like whatever hacking on the election system are likely to sponsored by the groups we identify for you. So I think in terms of safety, we prove a significant amount of greater hazard created by.
Sorry, you're well over time.
Okay, sorry. I
No
didn't see
worries.
the. I'll wrap it up here.
Thank you for that speech. Thanks everyone for the debate.